Please welcome on stage your moderator and distinguished panelists.
Voilà, il y a du monde là. Hello, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to this important seminar organized by the IMF, Navigating an Uncertain World. You might remember a couple of years ago, we were discussing about a concept called polycrisis, pandemic, war, energy crisis. And if I have to think about what will be the main takeaways here at the IMF spring meeting, it's all about uncertainties. And in order to discuss this, we have an excellent panel this afternoon. I'm going to introduce them. And of course, uncertainties this afternoon will be focusing on part of the world that is very critical these days, Middle East, Central Asia, and Caucasus. We have here with us Jihad Azur, the Director of the Middle East and Central Asian Department. Welcome.
Thank you.
Minister of Finance from Pakistan, Mr. Mohamed Aurangzeb. Thank you very much for accepting this invitation. Elena Dugard, she is the Chief Credit Officer for America and the Managing Director Credit Strategy at Moody's. And last but not least, Beata Zaborczyk, the Chief Economist of EBRD. So we have been discussing in the previous panel the rise of uncertainties. And the Middle East and Central Asian Department has just released a very important paper and a very important chapter in the Regional Economic Outlook for the Middle East and Central Asia that try to answer the rise in uncertainty and how they affect the economies. And in this chapter, we see that rising uncertainties have large negative economic impact. These negative impacts appear to be larger and more persistent for the Middle East and North Africa and Caucasus and Central Asia compared to the rest of the world. And moreover, in this chapter, existing macroeconomic vulnerabilities may amplify this impact. And the chapter, and you will have a QR code if you want to download that important piece of research, conclude that important policy implication that will help soften the hit on economy from uncertainties. This is exactly what we are going to discuss this afternoon. Number one, we are going to have a first round of discussions that will focus on this uncertain economic environment for the region. And number two, we are going to see as the policy implications, the policy response, and how can we build resilience. I'm very pleased first to ask Jihad. Jihad, welcome. Thank you very much for the invitation to moderate that panel. How concerned are you about the implication of global policy uncertainty for the economies in the Middle East and Central Asia, but also what are the main channels to which uncertainty spread, and does it affect some particular countries in your region? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. Of course, uncertainty is the theme that we are all debating during those spring meetings. For the region, uncertainty is not a new phenomenon. Let me answer your first question. Over the last 25 years, you go back, you see uncertainty growing in the region. And the research that you have mentioned highlights the key developments that we saw over the last 2.5 decades. Uncertainty has multiple sources. Some sources are external, related to global developments. Usually the transmission of global uncertainty is higher than other type of uncertainties. The two other type of uncertainties are becoming from geopolitical developments, and the region has been, a place where several geopolitical shocks took place over the last 2 decades. There is a third level of uncertainty that comes from internal issues, uncertainty coming from policies or other type of internal developments. Therefore, the nature of uncertainty is different, and the transmission channels are also different. There are, and this is also your second question, there are two main transmission channels. One is through the real economy. We see this affecting growth, And I will give some figures, but it's not only affecting growth. You see it also affecting investment. Over the last 15 years, we did recently, a couple of years ago, a study that showed that, for example, FDI declined constantly over the last 10, 15 years. Since the Arab uprising in 2011, we see constant decline of direct investment, while we saw an increase in capital flow. Therefore, investment was affected. Also, growth was affected. It had maybe less impact on some other aspects due to some of the policies that reduce the transmission mechanisms like subsidy in certain cases or the exchange rate regime. But this is not the only channel. There is another channel, which is the financial channel. The financial channel is also a very active channel. To illustrate, when you look at the volatility in the markets in the region, the VIX is double compared to other emerging markets, which reflects that any external shock has a bigger impact on the performance of the economies, at least measured from the financial markets. We see it also especially for emerging and developing economies in both MCD and MENA and Central Asia, especially on their borrowing cost. Of course, when countries have vulnerabilities, it affects them more, especially those who have high level of debt. The second dimension is the regional developments. And here, again, things are not 100% similar or clear. Let me take two examples. The war in Ukraine had a different type of transmission channels for the economies in Central Asia and Caucasus, while the Arab uprising has more severe impact on the performance of the economies in the region. Therefore, it's an important phenomena. It's not new, but it regained even now more importance because this part of the world is a connector. It's at the crossroad between Asia, Europe, and the US. Also, it's one of the main corridors for trade. And the fact that uncertainty is now big part of it is around trade, it creates a new challenge for countries in the region. The question is how to assess and understand uncertainties. Risks are easier to measure, to mitigate, and to address. Uncertainty is less clear. And I think in the second round, we can discuss how countries have been dealing with it and what they should do. But I think it's very important for us to understand first. The second very important element also to understand how others are dealing with it, because we're not in the region isolated. We need to understand what are the policy measures that others are doing. And three, we need to ask ourselves in the region is how we should work together. What type of cooperation countries need to develop in order for them to address those issues going forward.
Thank you, Jihad. We will come back to the policy implication related to trade, but also the opportunities that we can see, because uncertainty cannot be seen as negative. Elena, if I can go to you, we have been seeing higher market volatility, we have been seeing increased investor risk aversion, we have been seeing lower economic growth, and we have been seeing also an acceleration of global fragmentations. All of these are negative credit development. So how do you see yourself from these global new financial conditions and how CCA and Middle East countries are affected? Please.
So thank you. From credit perspective, financial conditions and the tightening financial conditions is one of the channels that the shocks that the global economy is experiencing will transmit to credit. And we have already seen a shock to credit conditions, and we have already seen tightening of financial conditions. The impact of trade measures and tariffs will play out over time. So it will be over the weeks and months that all of the impact on the economies will play out. But we've seen the financial markets have already reacted. So we have seen the repricing of equity markets equity markets have repriced across the globe. There has been some partial reversal, but only a partial recovery. More importantly, we have seen a material jump in high yield spreads. The high yield spreads have gone up in the bond markets, and there has not been a recovery there. So there is no reversal of the kind that we saw in the equity markets. So we are already seeing some tightening of financial conditions, and that will mean that we are going to be looking at higher default rates this year already compared to what we were expecting a couple of months ago. There is a silver lining. The silver lining is that spreads have been very tight by historical standards, so arguably there is a cushion before we really see much larger impact. So there's a bit of a cushion there. But the risks are to the downside, and the risk really come from two kind of main factors. One is the rising risk of economic recession, and one is the uncertainty. And I think it's very uncertainty with respect to trade policy is having very material effect. And I think it is really on point, the chapter that the IMF is putting out on this. And that given this high uncertainty, we are looking at very volatile financial markets going forward, and a risk, and a material risk that we will see further tightening of financial conditions. And I'll give you one example of what we are watching on the economic side. For the US, if you look at the short-term economic data that has come out over the last few weeks, we are seeing a very material drop in confidence. And it's confidence measures that are coming out are showing a drop of the magnitude of what we saw during COVID. And it's across the board. It's consumer confidence in household, it's small businesses, it's large companies, it's across the board. So that's an illustration of what uncertainty does. And if we end up in a situation where consumers pause spending and businesses pause investment and expansion, that will lead to a recession scenario. So to answer your question, my last point is the effect of this would be this tightening of financial market conditions would most impact countries which are reliant on market access, which have, and usually impacts the non-investment grade frontier markets. So these are the small emerging market countries, which are very reliant, which have countries which have large refinancing need, which have large debt servicing costs as a share of revenue, for example, and which are reliant on market access to finance that over the short term and don't have liquidity buffers to help them through that period.
Yeah. Thank you. Beata, if I can come to you, as the chief economist of the BRD, you are covering Central Asia. What do you see as a key difference between these economies and the other part of the world? So what are specifics here? And maybe you concur with Jihad arguments related to these countries.
So there are different kinds of uncertainty, as it has been mentioned. There's political uncertainty, macroeconomic uncertainty, uncertainty associated with conflict in the, and of course, uncertainty associated with trade. And the last one is what everybody talks about these days. Now, we forget that just a few years ago, we were very worried about uncertainty of supply. We were worried about resilience of value chains. It was all about shift from just in time to just in case. Today, uncertainty associated with trade is about security of market access. Now, what matters is where you are, not in absolute terms, but also in relative terms when it comes to uncertainty, when it comes to market access. And I think here, Central Asia may be somewhat less affected because in international trade, the laws of gravity matter. You trade more with nearby markets rather than with more distant markets. So that's one reason why these countries may be more sheltered. Also, reliance on commodities may mean that market access is less of an issue because incentive to impose tariffs on commodities is lesser. And finally, the fact that many of those countries are pursuing multi-vector policies may shelter them. And you already see in FDI data reflection of geopolitics. We looked recently at announcements of greenfield projects. So this is not a complete picture of FDI because it doesn't capture mergers and acquisition, it doesn't capture reinvested earnings, but it captures bigger greenfield projects. And last year, 10% of all projects went to Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt. And Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan also saw an increase in the number of greenfield FDI projects. And what all these countries had in common was that they were receiving FDI from all players, from the US, from the West, from the Middle East, as well as from China. So by pursuing this multi-vector strategy, they were actually relatively better off, and they were taking advantage of tensions other countries were facing. So I think what's important is not what shocks hit you, but rather how you respond to those shocks. I mentioned FDI as an opportunity, as a force for diversification. There's another opportunity that's associated with new transit routes between Asia and Europe, and the region is playing a very important role here. And uncertainty and the shocks may create an impetus for action, and in particular for regional cooperation. So they can focus minds and paradoxically lead to better outcomes.
Thank you, very good. And we will come back to these policy responses, and we will see maybe opportunities for Central Asia and the Middle East. Minister, if I come back to you now, you remember 2 years ago we were talking about inflation. The big debate was transitory or permanent. So now, where you are in Pakistan trying to figure out here, if we make the analogy with this recent global trade policy change, how it affects Pakistan? Do you see this is just transitory? That's what we are seeing with these uncertainties, or do you see it's going to be a permanent future for this new global economic landscape? Please.
Yeah, I think you've heard from the fellow panelists the entire risk profile, right? Global risks, regional risks, idiosyncratic risks for the countries and different policy responses. I mean, the region in itself is not a monolithic entity, so different countries will respond differently. But to earlier point, we can work with each other and help each other. For example, at this point in time, oil might mean different things to different countries, right? People who are importing oil will benefit. The other countries which have been helping out, they might have a discussion around budget. But coming back to Pakistan and the trade discussion, it's a very, very fundamental aspect for how we are trying to change the DNA of the economy at this point in time, from import dependence to export-led. And it might sound slightly paradoxical that we're talking about an export-led growth when everything else is going on in the world. We take a slightly different perspective on this, that while global trade might take a back seat for a little while, the importance of the regional corridors, and I just heard that as well, it becomes even more critical at this point in time. Mm-hmm. And from our country's perspective, we have been at it over the last 12 to 14 months. Whatever we have been doing in terms of trade and investment with GCC, we have sort of expanded that into the Central Asian republics and into Turkey, and now going forward into Africa as well. Because what we need to do and think through is diversification, both in terms of sectors and the markets. So markets I've just talked about, and this is a huge potential. For example, we currently do $1 billion of bilateral trade with Turkey. There's no reason that it can't go to 5 or 10 billion. And it's just the how part of it. And that's something which we are actively working on. Similarly, the diversification in Pakistan in terms of the sectors which are contributing to the export growth. So traditionally, we have been very much in the textile business. More recently, we have gone into IT services, and now into pharma, and now into auto. Because almost you have to say that every single sector in the country has to contribute. And the reason why it's important is, on one side, it's important from the trade and the export-led growth, but by definition, export-led growth equals productivity-led growth, because we will be able to tap international markets only if you are internationally competitive. So from our perspective, it's a very fundamental shift as well, that for those industries where we have given protection for the longest time, without sunset clauses, that era is gone. And from our perspective, while there's noise in the system around global trade, the diversification of the markets and diversification of our sectors will continue to propel us forward on this changing the DNA of the economy.
If I may ask you the following question. So you have been really implementing, major important reform in Pakistan. So is this uncertainty make you double down more on your reform, or will you stay the course?
Yeah, I think, if we are slightly, skeptical, we can say we can very easily get distracted or use this at this point in time as an excuse culture. We need to focus on what is in our control, and there is a lot in our control. For example, our reform agenda is around taxation, around energy, around SOEs, privatization, public finance. There's no reason why we need to stay back where we have been languishing in tax to GDP between 9 to 10%, and we want to move towards 13.5% by bringing in other segments and by using the role of technology. It's all in our control. It's all in our control. So let's not get distracted. Let's focus on what we have been doing, and also in terms of levers of growth. The sectors, agriculture, IT. I'll give you an example. Crop yields. The world uncertainty, etc., nothing stops us from increasing our crop yields and making agriculture a real lever of growth for Pakistan, because it's all in our control. The financing, the seed technology, etc. So I'm very clear that while, of course, we talk about uncertainty in terms of known knowns and known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and of course we live with that discussion, but we should really focus on what is in our control and keep at it.
Jihad, if I come back to you.
Yes, Mark.
Building resilience. One of the topics and key words came out here about the policy implications and the policy response for Central Asia and Caucasus. So we mentioned uncertainties, uncharted waters. So at the end also there may be opportunities for the region. What do you see? We never need to miss a good crisis, so there are opportunities for this country to double down on reform. So what should be the roadmap, and also how they can benefit, for these uncertainties, and maybe to accelerate reform that have been there for a long time?
Thank you. It's the question that we discussed during the week with the governors and the ministers in various of our meetings. Well, Mark, I think the first thing you should do is not to stop at the answer of the first question. Take the last crisis. It's trade crisis. Impact on the region on the surface is limited, giving the limited interaction in terms of trade or dependence on trade on the US. And that the oil and gas sector was excluded from the tariff. But when you go further, and it was mentioned by the panelists here, that you had other effect of this uncertainty. You had an impact on the financial flows, as well as also on the financial markets with the widening of the spread. The decline or the softening in oil price is an issue for oil exporting countries that they need to deal with. For the oil importing countries, is an opportunity to build on in order to build buffers and to increase resilience. Therefore, don't stop at the first round of analysis. And this is a big mistake. Many countries did this mistake in the region back in 2008 at the global financial crisis, not being fully integrated into the global financial system led many consider that they were little affected by the crisis. Therefore, I think it's very important to dissect and understand. The second thing, that also, whenever you exit a crisis, you need to analyze what has worked and what did not work. The last one was the inflation shock. In many countries in the region, especially some countries who have flexible exchange rate, were able to respond very quickly, which helped them to reduce the impact of the inflation shock. Therefore, be very proactive. Three, the analysis that we are releasing shows that if you don't address an uncertainty issue for 2 years, you could lose 4.5% of growth. Therefore, not moving or waiting for things to settle maybe is more costly than even trying to or starting to address. Therefore, you need to act. Act means that you need to take decisions. First set of decisions is that you try to do before is to build buffers. Buffers is not only about building reserves, is also about building your capacity to understand how those shocks are transmitted internally. Therefore, building buffer is very important. It's different between countries. Those who have reserves have the capacity to respond. Two, strengthen your policy framework. You should not underestimate how important is the policy framework, how important that the various policymakers need to coordinate, how the interaction between policies is important. Three, have a playbook of how you should address those issues, communicate about them, communicate to the markets in order to reduce the volatility, communicate to your counterpart, now you have an important trade shock, communicate to your population. Therefore, communication is very important. And three, don't only focus on addressing as firefighter. One of the very important, I think, element in building confidence is when the stakeholders see that you are addressing the medium-term issues. Countries in the region have an issue of productivity, improving productivity, both of labor and capital, deepening the financial market, increasing the space for the private sector. Those are important. In time of crisis, instead of having the asset re-evaluation held by the state, let the private sector deal with it. The private sector is much faster to react than the state. Therefore, those are important elements. The two silver linings that we see today, one is we see that in this world that is changing the modalities of interaction, the region is coming up as really a positive player, a connector. And this is something that several countries in the region are trying to play this role, and we are helping them. We're helping, for example, the GCC and Central Asia and Caucasus connect together, because also there are new channels of cooperation today. Look to your neighbors and try to do more business with your neighbor. Look to your also old relationship and try to strengthen those. This is very important. Second, it's try to also collect through common projects, as we see currently, for example, in Central Asia, your capacity to compete. There are several infrastructure projects that would create new routes or would make new routes more efficient. This is an important element in connectivity. And three, again, it's very important for countries in this part of the world to partner among each other. We see, for example, if I take the case of the GCC, potential in deepening financial integration, in improving regulation, in aligning certain number of structural reforms that could contribute to addressing their issues. Last, because of the geopolitical nature of some of the shocks, we need special attention. And this is what the fund is trying to do, helping some of the countries who are in fragility, post-conflict countries. You heard the last few days, several of those countries, the fund is trying to coalesce the international community as well as also the regional community to provide support to those, especially with the decline in ODA. This becomes an important element. Stability of those countries will improve the overall, I would say, risk profile of the whole region. Therefore, we should not underestimate that. And those are the opportunities in the future The region is rich in capital, has also young population, and it's, again, at the center of the world trade, and it needs to benefit from that.
You are very positive, Jihad. Let me maybe ask Beata. Beata, so Jihad has been talking about diversification, reconfiguration of global trade, and Central Asia as a region is not very well integrated. When you think about intra-trade among the region, it's only $8 billion, okay? So do you think there is an opportunity here to enhance regional integration? What will be maybe the parameters for that? But also you mentioned also this multi-vector policy. Jihad mentioned this Central Asia, Gulf countries, new relationship. We have been seeing 2 weeks ago a major head of state meeting between EU and Central Asia. So in this new vector policy, multi-vector, how this country can benefit and of this new reconfiguration of geopolitics and global trade?
So diversification is an important objective, and it is an important objective for Central Asia. During good and stable times, during rocky and uncertain times, it becomes even more important. Now, how to do that? Well, let me focus on 3 ways of thinking about diversification. One is do more on regional trade, as you mentioned. It's much easier to export to nearby countries than it is to faraway countries. So you may think about exporting to your neighbors as a stepping stone towards exporting to other markets. Second, don't think just about goods, think also about services. Right? You already mentioned export-led growth becoming a much harder proposition these days. The traditional model was agriculture to manufacturing to services. That's a strategy that's much more difficult these days. Actually, in our last transition report, we looked at the drivers of growth over the last 2 decades. And what we noticed is that before the global financial crisis, within the countries in our portfolio, there were about 1/3 of instances of growth where growth driven by exports of goods. After the global financial crisis, these instances became much more rare. So what matters is more services, exports and of goods and services as jointly drivers of growth. Now, in many of our countries, computer services are a bright spot. That's true in Eastern Europe, that's true in Caucasus, that's true in Southern Europe. And the reason why these countries can export computer services is its high educational attainment that's comparable to advanced economies. That's a legacy of socialist past. Now, Central Asia has comparable educational attainment, but has not been able to do as much when it comes to exports of computer services. Now, one reason may be that exports of services are more sensitive to business climate. Now, how can one remedy this? Of course, the first best solution is to improve business climate in a whole country, but an alternative may be to think about special economic zones for services rather than for manufacturing. Another thing one can do, and that comes out from our analysis, is that it's much easier to export services if you have opened your own services industry to competition, to inflows of FDI, because that allows your players to become better. Now, the third part of this diversification strategy, in my view, is having a world-class investment promotion agency. Why? Because historical experience shows that export discoveries, meaning exporting something you have not exported before, is often driven by entry of multinationals. What we also see in our analysis is that exporting services is harder than exporting goods, and often it's multinationals who drive exports of services. Now, when I talk about investment promotion, I don't mean handouts and tax holidays, but rather I mean provision of information, lowering the cost of entering the country, helping investors navigate the bureaucratic maze, the registration procedures. And the best thing about this type of investment promotion is that it's fairly inexpensive, it works, and if you get it wrong, not much happens because you have not introduced distortions to your economy.
Good. Elena, if I come back to you related to the current global financial conditions, we have been seeing in the chapter that the IMF and the regional economic outlook lay out that we see that these countries tend to have larger macroeconomic vulnerabilities, higher public debt, shallower financial market, and very weak institutions. How quickly you think policymakers can act to address these vulnerabilities, and you see any low-hanging fruit for that?
Let me address this through kind of how we see the channels of vulnerabilities. And I think vulnerabilities will transmit through three channels. One is and that very much echoes the analysis in the IMF. The first one is obviously the trade flows, direct increase in trade costs and decline in trade flows. The second one is the macro environment, what happens to growth, what happens to investment. Tariffs tend to be negative for growth, so we'll be looking at slower growth and higher prices. And the third one is financial conditions. So maybe I'll frame a little bit where the MENA and Central Asia region falls on all of those. We talked about financial conditions a lot. Tightening of financial conditions tends to hurt non-investment grade frontier markets the most across all regions. And it's non-investment frontier markets particularly because if you look over the last 10 years, they have experienced a very large increase in debt servicing costs as a share of revenue. So the burden of servicing debt, things like measures like interest payments to revenue and measures like that have increased quite a bit over the last 10 years. So the burden of servicing debt is larger. So that effect tends to affect countries across regions. The trade exposure, the direct trade exposure of the MENA and Central Asia region is actually less relative to some other regions. So if you look at measures like exports to the US as a share of GDP, the largest exposures are in Asia and countries in the Asian region. MENA is less directly exposed there, and Central Asia as well. And then the other channel through which the region will be affected is the macroeconomic environment. And the issue there is that with slower growth and lower growth and lower global demand, that will normally push commodity prices and oil prices down. So the risk is there if things escalate that you will get a downward adjustment in oil prices, and that will weigh on oil exporters, a number of which are in the MENA region. So diversification that many countries and regions have done to diversify revenue away from oil actually served their countries well in terms of having some resiliency to oil price fluctuations. But I'll leave it on a positive note. We are actually, before I depress everybody with the vulnerabilities, we're actually coming into this with a good amount of, I think we're overusing the word resiliency, but with a good amount of strength, if you will. The economies have generally recovered across all regions. The debt levels are stabilizing for most countries. Revenue was starting to, fiscal deficits were starting to come in from wide levels, but generally come in. So for most countries, actually, the outlook was pretty either stable or positive. We were, if I look at the sovereign rating side, we were, for the first time, I think in 4 years, we actually had rating upgrades outnumber downgrades throughout 2024 and the beginning of 2025. And we're actually entering 2025 with more positive outlooks than we have negative outlooks in the sovereign portfolio. So there's quite a bit of, we're coming to this from a position of strength in a way, and that provides some cushion there. And I think the last thing I'll say is from a kind of credit management perspective, what really matters is what happens over the medium term. So it's not one-year recession are not shocked, and it's not the short-term shock, it's where we come out in the medium term, and how much of this is going to be just cyclical and will be worked through, and how much of this will actually be structural and will weigh on longer-term growth prospects, which is really the question, which I think it will be some time before we know what that would be like.
Good. Why don't we go now to the audience in order to make this conversation interactive. So please introduce yourself. I will pick up a couple of questions, and after we go back to the panelists. Don't be shy. Over there, please introduce yourself. Yeah, the lady in blue.
She needs to come to the mic.
Yeah, if you can come, yeah, in the middle. Thank you.
My name is Suzanne Bishoprick from Global Sovereign Advisors. I keep hearing these wonderful words of better cooperation and connectivity in the region. How can investors, private sector within the region, exploit this new attitude of cooperation and connectivity within the region?
Thank you. Jia, do you want to take this?
You want me to address this one?
Yeah, and I'm Beata also.
Within the interregional
Well,
cooperation.
I think we have all converged that additional cooperation at intra-regional, inter-regional level is very important. But I would like to add two elements here. One, especially in terms of economic response. Those two regions, we need maybe to have a different groupings. We need to take the large economies, countries, for example, like Pakistan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, maybe Turkey, Morocco. Those countries, in terms of economic adaptation to shocks, to vulnerabilities, are going to be different from compared to small economies. Therefore, I think when it comes to the economic response, we need to have different type of groupings. When it comes to fiscal response, another grouping becomes more relevant, which is to which extent countries have buffers or not.
Yep.
And here countries, for example, at the GCC who have buffers, have the capacity to address some of those vulnerabilities and to protect their economies differently from countries, for example, who have high level of debt, who needs to be more proactive. When it comes to monetary and exchange rate, countries who have flexibility in the exchange rate, they have more also adaptability to shocks. Therefore, I think in terms of responding and in terms of policies, depending on the type of response, we could do different groupings in the region. But clearly, cooperation is going to be a key element because the broad international framework has shifted gradually and opening more space for more region to region and more, I would say, informal set of groupings to cooperate together.
Minister.
No, on a more practical note, just this whole regional connectivity and the regional corridors, over the last couple of months, I've had the opportunity to interact with my counterparts, first in Alula in Saudi Arabia, and then Henan province during the Boao Forum. So this thought process is not new. And what is happening right now is, as they say, never let a good crisis go to waste. So what I genuinely believe what is going to happen is this is going to be accelerated. So the building blocks and the pillars were already in place. People were talking to each other, already talking about and looking at all these corridors. And I just said diversification has been a key theme in this panel. It's almost by necessity now that we accelerate that journey, which has already been started by connecting a lot of these regional corridors.
Beata.
We've heard what needs to be done, but it's equally important to think about what should not be done. At the moment, we are seeing a resurgence of popularity of industrial policies, and yet these industrial policies tend to be discriminatory against foreign interests. And as countries are doing industrial policy because others are doing that, this can actually push us further along the path of fragmentation. So I think we need to be careful when it comes to industrial policy so that we don't create negative spillovers for other countries in the region.
Very good. Okay, please. I'm going to pick up the 2-3 questions, and after we go back to the panelists.
Thank you. My name is Mohamed Nani. I'm from Mauritania. I work for the Ministry of Economy and Finance in Mauritania. I have a question. I mean, given the current global uncertainties, what do you think as the key reforms and key action that policymakers should focus on to better anticipate the future shocks? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Key reforms. We will come back to that. There was, yes, please. Oh, there are many people. That's good. Over to you.
Hello, thank you.
Please, Judy, go ahead.
My name is Swanee, and this week I've heard the cornerstone of the meetings as a focus on the youth. And my apologies if this question has been answered, but in an increasingly uncertain world, how is the World Bank rethinking resilience not just as recovery from shocks, but as re-imaging the very structures that keep reproducing vulnerability, especially for rural, youth, and marginalized communities? Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, everybody, for this very interesting debate. My name is Andrei. I'm coming from Romania, Institute for World Economy, Romania Academy. I know very well the region because I'm a member of several international think tanks, including Moroccan Institute for International Relations. You talked about diversification of the structures, moving from industry to services, but I would like to hear your opinion about incorporating the technological progress, digitalization, research, development, innovation focus, and of course developing the financial markets in order to decrease the financing costs. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Why don't we answer this first round? Ziad.
Policies, I think the to-do list and not to-do list. The to-do list act very fast. Do not wait for time to pass because as the study showed that more the uncertainty grows, more the impact on the economy is bigger. The policy toolkit is the one that you have. You need to activate it and you need to improve it. Prudent fiscal policy is always good. Building buffers, increasing your reserves at the level of the central bank in order to, on one hand, have the capacity to intervene, and on the other hand, also provide additional comfort to market. Use this in order to see how you need to diversify your real sector, your trade policies, new agreements. It's very important. And also, it's the time to communicate to your population that you need to accelerate structural reforms. Those are the issues on the policy side for everyone. But there are variances. If you have a flexible exchange rate, it allows you to do other toolkits than if you have a fixed exchange rate. This is very important for you to do, but it's not enough. And I would like also to join my answer to the second, or to the question of the lady earlier. Sometimes when you respond, you want to stabilize and you forget certain number of important issues. Inclusion. You need also to make sure that your social protection framework is well sharpened in order to address the negative impact of this shock or a potential shock on your social fabrics. And how to, for example, accelerate your subsidy reform that is usually ineffective to get some savings to address some of the social issues. How you improve revenue mobilization in order to address those issues, and you reduce your reliance on financing and you increase your reliance on your own sources. How you could have an active debt management strategy in order to protect yourself by being more proactive in the markets. And also, how you use this to open up new opportunities. I totally agree with Beata. It's not the best way to start introducing some measures that are very expensive, proven to be not useful at all. Go for what really matters. There are countries in the region where the size of the public sector is still large, starting from the public banks. It's the time to address this issue, have the market be owner of that, have the private sector be in the lead of growth. If you do this, also your public finance will improve, and also your sovereign risks will decline. Have your economy become more productive by investing in connectivity and technology. I see a lot of islands of excellence in technology, AI, even in terms of renewable energy. I think it's time to create critical mass by developing joint projects between Pakistan and GCC countries, for example, between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and Gulf countries and so on. Therefore, to have projects together is also a way to build connectivity.
So, Minister, please. So I just want to quickly comment on the digitalization part of it. I think it's a real game changer, because digitalization is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. Faster, cheaper, better. And what number of countries, and what has happened in Pakistan as well, we have centers of excellence which are verticals, right? Something going on in the tax authority, something going on in terms of our payment rails. And what we are doing right now is go horizontal, so that these systems get more and more integrated, and that is where the delta is going to come in. The other thing is the AI part of it, and we can talk about the large AI in terms of data centers, etc., but it's really the small AI where with those interventions you can actually create the deltas. We just talked about IT services, and I just want to link it with the youth part of it. Is in Pakistan we have the 4th largest freelancer population in the world. So we don't need to say this is, you know, how many jobs. It's not the government's job to give jobs, and we should provide policy framework, policy continuity, let the private sector lead, and provide the ecosystem to the youth and the freelancer population, because they are the ones who are going to create the delta. So I think, you know, we are very, very big on how this is going to be a real game changer for any country, including Pakistan.
Beata, please.
So it's very important to pursue horizontal policies, macro policies we heard about. So let me focus on vertical policies, industrial policy. Here, what's important is to follow certain principles. So first, articulate why you're doing something, what your objective is. And if you have multiple objectives, have a hierarchy, so that you don't have 2 ministries pursuing objectives that are on a collision course with each other and cancel each other. Second, if you choose to support a particular activity, particular sector, particular region, put an expiration date, build in evaluation. Once you award some preferential treatment, it's politically incredibly difficult to roll it back. That's why building in an expiration date from the beginning or conditioning something on evaluation, it's very important. And finally, it's building competition. And remember that industrial policy is as much about picking winners as it is about letting losers go. So don't invest in activities that cannot ever bring, where you cannot have a comparative advantage in the future.
Elena, do you want to add something? No. Yes. Oh, so let's take two more questions. 3. Please, over to you.
Hi, this is Fateh. I'm currently studying development economics at Harvard. I just had a question that Pakistan has successfully navigated through many uncertain situations, like the global financial crisis and then through COVID. So what lessons does Pakistan have for the rest of the world as the world faces increasing uncertainty?
Thank you. Let me take please, sir.
Hello, my name is Belarmin. It's an honor to be here. My question is, what's a practical step can leaders take today to be prepared for the future uncertainty?
It's a very important question. Over to you,
Prepared for
please,
the future.
My question is, as someone who has seen the world coming out from the uncertainty and supply and value chain. What hope gives you about the uncertainty that we have today in market access and trade?
Thank you. Okay, so Minister, first, if you take the question on Pakistan.
I think the point around COVID, indeed we were one of the more fortunate countries which negotiated it well, in the sense that the loss of human life was restricted, etc. So I would say, while we can give a lot of kudos to the people who planned everything, from my perspective, what made the real difference is the role of technology, and how it was in linking the federation with the provinces and provinces with the cities, and real-time information coming in. That was the real game changer and the real difference and therefore we are so clear that going forward, the role that technology is going to play will remain critical for Pakistan.
Thank you. Elena, you want to add something?
I mean, I could comment on the hope for the future. I think technology is one thing which is developing fast. It's all around us. And it's one of the, I look at it from a growth perspective, it's one of the upside to the growth forecast of today.
Jid.
Well, most of the countries that we are talking about are middle-income countries, emerging economies, including those who have buffers, and including those who have high level of reserves. Therefore, they have to be double vigilant than others. Advanced economy, large economies have deep markets, they have strong financial access, and therefore they can afford making mistakes. Those countries cannot. Our recommendation to those countries is to be double vigilant and advanced economies. Move fast, do not wait. Waiting increases uncertainties. Moving fast will allow you at least to better understand. 3, communicate. It's very important, especially for middle income and open economies, to communicate to the market, to communicate to rating agencies, communicate to institutions, to explain what are the challenges, how you are addressing them, and also provide them with your views on the assessment of those shocks on you. And accept that 2025, 2026, being 2 years of high uncertainties, prevent of going overboard and do things that you would regret, i.e. expansionary fiscal policies, for example, or relaxing in terms of monetary policy before having clarity or reaching stable waters. Therefore, be cautious, be ready to move fast, and be also very proactive in explaining the challenges. I think several here on the panel raised this issue, communicating, explaining, providing information, and even if you don't have the full picture, try to make sure that you explain where the issues are and what you are trying to do and to mitigate them.
On the leadership side, the only thing I would add is you are put in a leadership position to make and take decisions. Timely decisions, timely execution. And maybe I'm speaking out of turn because I've come from the private sector. It's just my first year in a government role, and one should be more careful around taking decisions in the government. But I genuinely believe in that. Timely decisions, timely execution. That's what makes the difference from a leadership perspective.
Thank you. Maybe I will take the opportunity of being the chair of this panel to ask all of you a final question. And like everyone is going back home, everyone is trying to figure out what was the main takeaways of the spring meeting of the IMF and the World Bank. So Jihad, for you, what was your main takeaway? You met many governors, ministers, policymakers, market people. What was for you the main takeaway of these meetings?
I think ladies first. Let's start with the ladies and they'll come at the end.
Okay, no problem.
I'm
Elena.
the eternal optimist, never waste a good crisis. That was the one of the refrains of the meeting.
I think this heightened uncertainty is to stay with us.
Yes.
So we need to learn to operate under these more difficult conditions.
Think out of the box, get out of your comfort zones, and make decisions, uncertainty is here to stay?
Well, I have some more time. I see 3 pluses, 2 minuses. The first plus is clearly there is high level of awareness of the moment. Yes. In all the meetings we had with authorities and others, I felt that everybody is on top of the issues, everybody is recognizing the challenges, and everybody is also trying to figure out how to address it. The second plus, it's more the recognition of the role of institutions, including the fund, in helping, assessing and also providing with the right diagnosis, but also that the policies that we are proposing, be it at a national level, at regional level, or international level, are validated by what our interlocutors are sharing with us. The third one, which is despite the high level of uncertainty, when you look at the numbers, even if the numbers have been revised downward, and I take the numbers in Middle East and Central Asia, we are still seeing growth, for example, this year and next higher than last year. We are seeing some of the other indicators, for example, inflation, being under control. And even countries who are facing challenges are still having access to market. Those are the 3 pluses. The 2 minuses, I think, we have not been able to recover from previous crises that affected us. COVID, the inflation, and in the region, the huge geopolitical crisis. And this is something that I think is eroding confidence of citizens and could lead to maybe a disconnection between citizen and decision makers. And the last one, for the post-conflict reconstruction, especially in the region, you need more resources, and I see ODA going down. I want to conclude with that. It's very important that the international community provide a helpful hand to those who are suffering most, countries who are facing conflicts, countries who are in fragility, who need to be supported going forward.
Thank you, Jihad. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, our fellow panelists. Let's conclude. Let's extend a warm applause to all our speakers, panelists, and we look forward to see you in October. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.